I came across a Reddit thread where someone described a recurring dream, and every version of the dream followed this same structure. She's in a bad situation with her partner, lots of instability, and then a man appears and tells her, "Your path is wrong, come with me, I'll take care of you." And I've seen this same kind of dream in other threads and in dreams that I've worked directly with. When you look at how people respond to dreams like this, you start to see the fragmentation in how dreams are understood. Some people immediately interpret it psychologically, saying it's her subconscious recognizing that she's in a toxic relationship and trying to push her out of it. Others take a more internal symbolic approach and say the man represents a protective or guiding part of her psyche. And then you have people who move into a religious framework, saying that this could be Jesus calling her out of her current life. All of those interpretations show up in the same thread, and none of them are wrong, but they're all incomplete because they're focused on identifying what the figure represents instead of tracking what the dream is actually doing. If you step into psychological research, particularly Jungian frameworks, there's a well-documented concept that dreams will generate figures that represent a more integrated or directive aspect of the psyche, often referred to as the self as opposed to the ego. These figures tend to appear at moments where the dreamer's current life direction is misaligned, and they don't show up passively. They interrupt and redirect. That pattern is consistent with what's happening in the dream, where the environment continues to degrade, and then there's a figure consistently appearing to offer a different trajectory. From that perspective, the dream is corrective in structure. Now, if you shift into Buddhist discussions of dreams, particularly those referencing Dharma dreams, you see a similar pattern described, but in a different language. Practitioners will often note that some dreams reinforce confusion or attachment, while others feel like they're pulling the dreamer back toward practice, toward clarity or a path that benefits the self and others. In those discussions, the emphasis is not on the symbols themselves, but on whether the dream creates movement toward alignment or away from it. And that distinction, movement towards or away, is much closer to what's usually happening in this type of recurring dream. Then when you look at the Christian interpretations, you see people immediately identifying the figure as Jesus or as a divine messenger calling the dreamer to change their life. That interpretation shows up repeatedly in public forums because people recognize the authority and clarity of the interruption. In religious language, that kind of direct interruption is often associated with Christ consciousness or divine calling. Again, different language, but it's pointing to the same structural pattern in the dream. This is where I draw a very clear line in how I work with dreams. I don't assign fixed identities or meanings to dream figures, and I don't reduce a dream to this equals your Dharma or this equals Jesus. That kind of labeling really collapses the complexity of what the dream is doing. At the same time, I also don't dismiss those interpretations outright because they're picking up on something real. When people say this feels like Jesus, what they are actually sensing is a moment in the dream where a higher order alignment is being presented with clarity and authority. In Buddhist language, that would be described as movement towards Dharma. In psychological language, it would be movement towards integration. The language changes, but the function is the same. The most important mistake people make at this point is assuming that because the dream is showing an alternative path, it is telling them what to do. You can see that assumption directly in the thread where someone says the dreamer should just act on the dream and leave the relationship. Another person pushes back and says that's dangerous and that dreams shouldn't dictate decisions. That pushback is actually important because it highlights a misunderstanding about how dreams function. Dreams do not override free will, and they are not instructions. What they do is they map trajectories. They show you where your current path is leading, and they show you alternative directions that are available within your system. Research in cognitive neuroscience supports that idea that dreams simulate scenarios and outcomes rather than issuing commands. The brain uses dreaming to model emotional and behavioral patterns, often exaggerating them so that they become visible to you. In this case, the repeated extreme scenarios, like haunted houses or homelessness, are not predictions but amplifications of instability. They're showing the direction of the current trajectory, not necessarily the literal future. The interruption in the dream is part of that same modeling process, presenting an alternative pathway so that the system can evaluate. This is why I don't approach dreams through symbol decoding, and I don't approach them through belief systems. I approach them through flow. The question that actually matters in a dream like this is not who the man is, but what happens when he appears. Does the environment stabilize? Does the emotional tone shift? Is there a sense of expansion or relief? Or does it create more confusion? Those are measurable shifts inside the dream, and they tell you whether you're looking at a movement toward alignment or just another layer of the same pattern. I guess you could say the way that I look at dreams is more practical. Instead of analyzing the dream from the outside, I always try to talk to the dreamer. I ask a lot of questions. I invite dialogue. It's really important what conversation results from the dream. This is how dream work really hits in waking life. When you do that, you can hear the difference in the dreamer's own words. When you start working with dreams this way, the question of whether something is dharmic or a divine calling becomes less important as a label and more obvious as an experience. What this thread shows very clearly is that people intuitively recognize these moments in dreams, but they don't have a consistent way to work with them. They either reduce the dream to psychology, elevate it into religion or symbolism, or dismiss it entirely as imagination. What's missing is tracking the movement itself. And once you do that, you don't need to rely on interpretation. You can see very directly whether your current path is reinforcing instability or whether something in your system is trying to shift you out of it. And that's the real value of dreams, not as symbols to decode and not as instructions to follow, but as real-time feedback on what is actually unfolding in your life. When a dream repeats with the same structural interruption, like this one does, it's showing you it's showing you that your dream self and Earth self system has already identified a misalignment and is generating alternatives for you to consider. The question is whether you can see the trajectory clearly enough to decide what you want to do with it. But of course, we do regularly have precognitive dreams, and that's a whole other thing, but it's still based on the same concepts I talked about, especially the current trajectory concept. And surprisingly, some precognitive dreams can be quite banal, as they will show things like going to the store and not finding the yogurt flavor you like, and then the next day that exact thing happens. But also, my two most beautiful precognitive dreams have been showing that a certain dog was about to come into my life. I was actually walking on the sidewalk when my dog came to me, just like the same dog came to me in a dream 6 months earlier. And I actually was filming a podcast when that happened. So I have it on film as she comes to me.